Good morning, you're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Russia attempted to develop ground assault operations under the cover of airstrikes, said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He also stated that Ukrainian investigators are examining missiles and drones to establish whether a third country supplied components to Russia or North Korea.
Almost 150 Russian attacks against our positions and more than 4,500 attacks, including from heavy weapons. In fact, the Russians tried to develop assault operations under the cover of their massive attack. While our forces were concentrating on defending against missiles and drones, the Russians intensified their ground attacks. Also, our investigators, forensic scientists and experts are inspecting the sites of missile and drone strikes, establishing and verifying the circumstances of the relevant attacks, and conducting examinations of the found missile and drone debris to establish full information about these weapons and critical components in them that were supplied to Russia or North Korea from third countries and used in production.
The U.S. is denying any claims that it could lift sanctions on Russia as part of a peace deal in Ukraine. A media report out on Thursday indicated the White House was considering relaunching Nord Stream 2, something Europe is firmly against.
Lifting sanctions in exchange for a peace deal in Ukraine. Politico has reported that the White House was debating lifting restrictions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and other Russian assets in Europe.
This is unequivocally false. Neither Steve Witkoff nor I have had any conversations about lifting sanctions against Russia as part of a deal with Ukraine. This is journalistic malpractice.
Since a large portion of Europe's LNG is now imported from the United States, the move would seem harmful to American businesses. Relaunching any of the two Nord Stream pipelines would mean more Russian natural gas on the European market.
Poland's position has been quite clear that Russia needs to pay the price for the aggression. So at this moment, it's quite clear that we are not open to ideas of lifting sanctions.
The main proponent behind the idea, according to Politico, is U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, who is in and out of Russia leading the talks with Putin. Marco Rubio and other members of the administration were reportedly against the idea of lifting sanctions. In November of last year, the Wall Street Journal reported that an American businessman was interested in purchasing Nord Stream 2.
Stephen P. Lynch, who prefers to stay under the radar, says a deal for the Russian pipeline would serve long-term U.S. interests.
A person who's familiar with how business is done in Russia was the guest of the latest episode of TVP World's On the Record. Bill Browder has accused the Russian state of killing his lawyer and threatening him and his relatives.
It's a complete, lawless, dangerous, physically dangerous, financially dangerous country. It's an insanity to do business in Russia. It amazes me that these guys are running around touting this as a good idea.
In 2019, towards the end of his first term as president, Donald Trump imposed sanctions on entities that were in charge of finishing the construction of Nord Stream 2. Joe Biden lifted them and subsequently reintroduced them after the launch of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The pipeline was never officially opened and was damaged in an attack in September of 2022. But one of its threads could be operational if sanctions were lifted.
The sanctions are not a problem of America only. There's a world problem. And I think that US can withdraw sanctions. But it will be a question for Europe, how to behave, yes. Just to follow Americans or to protect sanctions for Russia.
Over the past 3 years, Europe has made an enormous effort to wean itself off of Russian energy supplies. Reversing this policy is not something the old continent is keen on doing.
Nord Stream is history and it will not be repeated. Nord Stream was a mistake and we should have listened more carefully and at an earlier stage to our friends and partners in Eastern Europe.
For TVP World, I'm Marek Steele.
According to reports by Bloomberg, the U.S. delegation will demand that Russia recognize Ukraine's need to maintain an adequately equipped army. An American media outlet says the issue is expected to be raised during today's meeting between Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin. The demand challenges one of Vladimir Putin's main goals, which is the demilitarization of Ukraine. The U.S. delegation also wants Moscow to return the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which has been occupied by Russia since 2022, to Ukrainian control. At first, the plant would be placed under U.S. oversight to supply electricity to cities on both sides of the front line. Other points of discussion between Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin include secure passage across the Dnipro River and returning the Russian-occupied Kharkiv region back to Ukrainian control. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that the ball is in Russia's court to end the war in Ukraine. Speaking following his talks with Donald Trump, Rutte said the two leaders also discussed defense spending of NATO member states and the upcoming alliance summit in The Hague.
Obviously, we discussed Ukraine, but the main emphasis of the meeting was on the NATO summit coming up in The Hague. And we are really all very excited about the fact that we will see a NATO which is spending so much more on defense, particularly European and Canadian side, more and more making sure that we equalize with what the US is spending. As the ambassador here said the other day, it will not be billions, but when you look at it for the years to come, it will be trillions. So I worked with him for 4 years, between 2010 and 2014. I stopped trying to read his mind. We'll see, but there is something on the table now, I think, where the Ukrainians are really playing ball, and I think the ball is clearly in the Russian court now.
United States President Donald Trump said Russia offered major concessions regarding a peace deal with Ukraine. During last evening's press conference in the White House, Trump went on to claim that Russia not annexing the rest of Ukraine is a big concession in itself.
What concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war, taking the whole country. Pretty big concession. Working with Ukraine, we'll do the best we can, but they lost a lot of territory. When you say Crimea, that was handed over during a president named Barack Hussein Obama. That had nothing to do with me, Crimea. That was 11 years ago with Obama. And they made a decision. There wasn't a bullet fired. There was no fighting. There was no anything. They just handed it over. Now they say, well, can you get it back? I think that's going to be a very difficult thing to do. That was given by Barack Obama when he was president, not by Donald Trump.
Poland is proposing to cut EU red tape to help accelerate the bloc's plans to increase its military spending. The initiative will be promoted as part of Poland's rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, which ends in June. In March, the European Commission unveiled a plan to mobilize 800 billion euros for European defense spending. Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Ignacy Niemczycki, told the Polish press agency that if Europe is to increase its level of defense readiness, procedures must be changed. It's thought the initiative could also simplify regulations around EU agricultural policy. Poland will on Friday mark the 1000th anniversary of the crowning of the first Polish king, Bolesław the Brave. President Andrzej Duda and Prime Minister Donald Tusk will attend a commemoration ceremony in the central western city of Gniezno, where the coronation took place. The president is due to lay a wreath at the monument of Bolesław the Brave before unveiling a commemoration plaque. The 1025 coronation is significant in Polish history because it marks a moment when Poland became a sovereign state that was recognized by other European countries. Thousands have gathered in Rome to pay their final respects to Pope Francis. Following several days of lying in state at St. Peter's Basilica, the funeral for the late Pope is scheduled for Saturday. Reporting from the heart of the Vatican is our correspondent, Alex Cadier.
Well, they came from all over the world, and there are tens of thousands to say a final farewell to Pope Francis. 60,000 people in the first 24 hours streaming into St. Peter's Basilica that you can see behind me. They came from South America, moved by the first Pope from the Americas. They came from Central and Eastern Europe. We spoke to some Polish students who came to say goodbye to Pope Francis. Now they look towards the future, towards the next Pope. Some said, in the image of John Paul II, they would like to see another European Pope. But that question will be for the next few weeks. For now, they have until 8 p.m. on Friday to say their final farewells to Pope Francis. That is when his humble wooden coffin will be sealed for the final time before processing to the Basilica, where the funeral will take place on Saturday. 250,000 people expected in the Vatican and in Rome to attend that funeral for Pope Francis. A really moving moment, I have to say. Covering this has been a very emotional experience with people from all over the world, really looking back at the legacy of Pope Francis, a reforming pope, a progressive pope, some of them told me, really celebrated by many for his openness to others, for his humility in the way that he was in his papacy. That humility will also be reflected in the funeral. It's been reflected in the very simple wooden coffin that he has been lying in state in, while in their tens and tens of thousands people have come from all over the world to say a final goodbye to Pope Francis. Alex Cadier, TVP World, the Vatican.
The Holy See officially unveiled the list of officials who will attend Saturday's funeral for Pope Francis. It includes some 130 delegations, including 50 heads of government and 10 monarchs. Among the attendees will be U.S. President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The list of officials present at Pope Francis's funeral also includes the presidents of Poland, France, Germany, Lithuania, Latvia, Slovakia, Moldova, and Hungary. While most countries have sent their heads of state, Israel will be represented by a lower-level delegation consisting of the Israeli ambassador to the Holy See, Yaron Ziedeman. Similarly to Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Russian President Vladimir Putin will not be attending the funeral. People across Slovakia took to the streets on Thursday evening to express their disgruntlement with new legislation that, in their opinion, aims to crack down on non-governmental organizations.
Several cities in Slovakia, including Bratislava, Košice and Banska Bystrica, saw anti-government demonstrations, which are part of a wave of protests that began after Slovakian Prime Minister Fico traveled to Moscow in December, where he met with Vladimir Putin. Protesters in the capital Bratislava chanted "No to the Russian law" and "Slovakia is Europe."
The government is showing its incompetence in everything it does, aligning itself with the Russian aggressor. It is trying to find ways to suppress freedom in Slovakia, which will lead to the overall decline of the country, its institutions, hospitals, healthcare facilities. In fact, the entire world as we knew it in Slovakia is deteriorating and starting to resemble Russia, where the state is dysfunctional and the people are not free.
Protesters in Bratislava also rallied in front of the presidential palace. They urged President Peter Pellegrini not to sign the NGO Act into law, and he has until May the 2nd to make a final decision on the legislation. Though widely considered an ally of Prime Minister Fico, Pellegrini has opposed some of the Fico government's policies.
Crowds from an early morning, empty shelves. A Polish designer has made a big splash in H&M stores. Who is she and why do her collections spark such massive excitement? Well, find out for yourselves in our next report.
For the first time in history, a collection by Polish designer Magda Butrym has hit H&M stores in Poland and around the world as part of a global collaboration with the Swedish fashion giant. The Polish designer's brand is marking its 10th anniversary this month. Magda Butrym has created a line for H&M called Femininity in Bloom, with the rose motif that has become a symbol of her brand.
She's truly our pride because her designs are worn by the world's biggest celebrities, from the Kardashians to top models. Last week's global premiere was full of stars and industry insiders.
The interest in Magda Butrym's designs was overwhelming. The collection sold out online within minutes. The Polish H&M website struggled to handle the traffic, according to shop workers, with all accessories and clothing disappearing in every size from smallest to biggest.
It looks really interesting. I think it preserved Magda Butrym's style, the roses, the femininity, the overall vibe. Very good designer, great collaboration. I'm really happy her creations are now available to everyone.
I love it because it's like very spring feeling with the flowers and everything, and I also love the color red, so it was really nice.
The collection is cohesive and serves as a strong reflection of Butrim's work over the past decade. It will be available in stores until Sunday, April 27th.
Well, by the looks of it, a lot of people made a splash yesterday. Thank you so much for joining. This would be all for now, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.